Welcome everybody here tonight to hear the King Store story. We've known it as the store, the old store, the King's grocery store, King and Sons, the King store. You may know it as other names too. But anyway, the King store is what we'll talk about tonight. And yes, it was 1925 to 71. And the first owners, like Larry said, can be seen on the website he told you about, and that'll catch you up to beginning tonight. It is pretty amazing for a family or family members to have owned a business for that many consecutive years. So tonight we'll hear about the quality, quantity, and service that the King store provided. And it's a tremendous accomplishment for their family. So tonight we have Rhonda and Ron, King Rhonda Miller, who you just introduced, Terry Miller, and of course Melanie Miller DeMorrow, who will do the presentation. Enjoy the program.
Thank you, Donna. When asked about speaking tonight, Rhonda, Terry, and I talked about who was going to speak, and I either won the coin toss or drew the short straw, whichever way you look at it. Rhonda said it's because I had worked at the store, and Terry said it's because I'm the oldest. Regardless, it's been a great trip down memory lane thinking about when I worked there and how things were back then in those days. Some of you, I'm sure, have many stories to tell as well. King's Grocery offered lots of Bristol kids great work experience through the years while they were in high school. And I also want to thank Donna for all the work she put into scanning pictures, searching for pictures, and organizing pictures. She just helped us out a great deal. Larry provided a wonderful history of the building in the years leading up to King's ownership. These items you see tonight are just some items that we found while cleaning out Janice King Corson's house after she passed away. Janice was the only child of Claude and Dorothy King and our cousin. This picture is taken from an oil painting that Janice had painted for her father for Christmas one year. I believe Martin Stevens painted it. I don't know if you remember that name, but it shows how well maintained the building was and what a great historical site. And there's another side view. These pictures are back here on the ledge for you to look at. A little King family history to show our family connection. Jack, when we met, he just wondered how the Millers fit into this group. So it all started with Samuel P. King, who you can see was a very busy man. He and his first wife, Sarah, had 5 children before she died in 1851. And he remarried Barbara, and they had 9 children. And I'm not sure how many of those 14 children survived. Samuel H. King was one of those 9 children of Samuel and Barbara, and he had a son, Augustus, who was Claude's father. Claude married Dorothy McClure in May of 1929, and Dorothy was the sister of our mother, Marilyn McClure Miller. Mom worked at the grocery store for Augustus and Alice when they owned it, early during high school years. And later on, while we kids were in high school, or in school, she worked there during the day until Claude closed the store. And then she went to work at Harding's and worked there for over 30 years. Interestingly, Rhonda's husband, Ron King, also figures into the picture. His father, William King, was the son of Carl King, who was a cousin to Claude's father, Augustus. This just shows pictures of Samuel and Barbara King, who were Claude's great-grandparents. And Dorothy and Claude, you probably, if you knew them, that they look real familiar. They married in 1929, and we figure this is probably maybe from their 50th wedding anniversary around 1979. And then a picture of Augusta standing outside the store looking north toward the store. This is just some chronological detail of the King's ownership. In January 1925, Augustus and his wife Alice, along with a partner, Ed Sands, opened K&S Grocery Market, with the purchase of the inventory from Sam Whitmer. By July, Ed Sands had to step away, and Augustus bought out his interest. At that time, Claude began working with his father in the store. Then Augustus's son Richard started working with them in 1926, and the name was then changed to King & Sons. It was not until around 1930 that Augustus and Alice purchased the lot 2 and 3 from the Apps. So they had just originally purchased the inventory of the store from Whitmer, and Apps still owned the lots. Then in 1945, Claude took over the management of the store. I'm assuming that's when Augustus may have decided it was time to retire. And in 1948, they acquired lots 2 and 3 from Augustus. This picture would have been when Claude owned the store. Notice the advertising that he wrote on the windows in shoe polish. And if you zoom in, Jack, you can see what caught my eye on the left-hand side, souse and head cheese. I remember that well, since I had to work in the meat market. People actually bought that. Bologna. Bologna, yeah, the way he spelled bologna. And then you can see the items which he always sat out front and carried in each night. This slide shows the 1925 banner announcement of the opening of K&S Grocery and Market Company, with a picture of Ed Sands on the left and Augustus and Alice on the right. This caption reads, "Successor to Salesman Sam, App's old stand, K&S Grocery and Market Company will have its opening on Saturday, January 31st. Having purchased of Sam Whitmer his large general stock of dry goods, notions, groceries, etc., and also the meat market located in the App building, we respectfully solicit a continuance of the patronage accorded Mr. Whitmer, and an invitation is extended to new customers. A.C. King and Ed Sands proprietors serving hot coffee and fried cakes at opening." And here again it mentions that they only purchased the inventory and not the building. Gloves hanging on the right-hand side there. I think on the counter is Hershey's. I think that says Hershey's syrup on those cans. Left-hand side at the back, up at the on the shelving are Kellogg's Corn Flakes, and then hanging up there are bananas. It looks like to me. And the store looked very much like that, except the counter in the front was not there when I worked there. Not quite sure what happened to it, but it would be a neat old antique to have. This is not a real good picture, but it shows the meat counter that was at the back of the store. And if any of you are ever in there, you remember that long meat counter. And it says the old store before modern packaging and when the only refrigeration was ice. It has cookie racks, beans, coffee, rice, sugar, flour, and all such items in bulk bins, even bulk spices. Vinegar in barrels. A kerosene pump was located by the door that was at the foot of the east stairs, and also had bulk garden seeds, cattle and chicken feed, baled hay and straw. There were work clothing and shoes, most everything but dress clothing and hardware. They did their own butchering until restricted by World War II. A lot of these bulk items were before my time, and I never had to fill jars with vinegar or pump kerosene into jars, but I do remember weighing out the bulk seeds, and on the table here are some of the seed jars that were used in the store, as long as the little measuring jar and scoops that were used to scoop the feed. Here's a better view of the meat case. Notice at the top of the old scale that was used to weigh meat before we wrapped it in butcher paper and tied it with a string. That scale was eventually replaced with a newer model. And right behind the scale, right behind it, a little to the left, is where the slicer was. When I worked there, we sliced meat in that area. The area behind Augustus and Claude, when I worked there, had a square butcher block that was where he'd fling the sides of beef and cut up the roasts and make the hamburger. And the towel rack back there in the back behind Claude, we found in Janice's garage when we cleaned it out. It was hanging there in the garage, and it's now, my niece has that now, and along with some of the towels with it. To the left was the walk-in cooler where slabs of meat were hung. Meat would be delivered from Mishler Packing Company, and they would be cut up on that butcher block and made into roast, steaks, or hamburger. Sometimes he would have meat cut up and in the case for people to buy. A lot of times people would come in and, excuse me, want something, and he would custom cut it. He wouldn't have the hamburger made up, so he'd have to grind it. And if you knew Claude, you knew how slow he could be. And I remember people getting so impatient waiting on him, but you know, they always came back, so yeah. This is we don't have many pictures of inside of the store, and I'm not sure when this was taken, but probably when it was at one point for sale, since there's nothing in it. These next four pictures are from an article that Wilma Stutchman wrote that ran in the Elkhart Truth on October 7th, 1964. This picture of the King's store, Claude standing in front of the old cooler that held everything from milk, cold sodas, eggs, butter, cheese. People come in and want that, and we just go to the cooler and get it out for them. Next is a picture of my brother Terry picking candy out of the famous penny candy case, which he and many other kids love to do. Kids would come on their lunch hour and after school to pick up treats. At that time, a general store had operated in that location for 115 years. Larry App's presentations provided an excellent history of the early years. Early in their ownership, Claude and Dorothy lived in the apartment upstairs. At some point, they purchased a home, but Claude would normally stay in the apartment during the week. He was there almost 24/7. Dorothy worked in the store and handled most of the bookwork. Also mentioned in this article is the Great Fire of 1885, which destroyed at least 8 buildings on Main Street. And that was taken from an article in the Bristol Banner on April 17, 1885. Fortunately, at that time, the building was not burned, but sadly, that's not the case recently. The next 2 slides probably don't have a thing to do with the grocery store, but we found them, so we put them in. They're for lot 26 in Bristol, originally owned by Augustus's father, Samuel, and signed over to Augustus and Alice in July of 1939. At that time, it indicated that Samuel reserved a life interest in the property. Unfortunately, Samuel passed away in January of 1940, so 5-6 months later, and then Augustus and Alice transferred the property to Claude and Dorothy. Rhonda's son did some research to see if he could find out where this was located. Larry may have better ideas, but he came up with 3 options. One across the river in Congdon Park, one down where the old train station is, down by the railroad tracks, and one a couple 3 lots east of where the electric pineapple is today. And I remember Claude and Dorothy lived in a house down by the railroad tracks, so it could have been that property, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, at first we thought it was the deeds for the store, and that's why we put it in, but then looking and looking, we realized it wasn't. The next 3 slides are part of an interview of Claude by Martha Pickrell in 1982, inquiring about the structures on the west side of the building. The red arrow shows where the ice cream parlor was when King's took over the store. This was later changed to the feed store. The next slide shows, the red arrow shows where machinery and automobiles were stored in the earlier days. It also addresses the much talked about hole in the floor where Mr. Probasco was lowered down when he passed away. I can remember the place in the ceiling over the register, and I can still see my Aunt Dorothy standing on that register in the winter to get warm underneath that cutout space. The next slide shows the west side of the building where the ice cream parlor was. We just thought it was a neat old picture there. You can see ice cream parlor down there on the bottom.
All right, why don't we take a break for just a little bit. Make sure get into some coffee, cookies,